first part of Chapter 6 of the Graveyard Book. I hope you've been enjoying our reading so far, and if you'd like to, you can comment some of your ideas about the book, some things that you think might happen, or just some general comments that you have over our reading so far. Chapter 6. Rain in the graveyard, and the world puddled into blurred reflections. Bod sat, concealed from anyone, living or dead, who might come looking for him, under the arch that separated the Egyptian walk and the northwestern wilderness beyond it from the rest of the graveyard, and he read his book. "Dammy," came a shout from down the path. "Dammy, sir, and blast your eyes. When I catch you and find you, I shall make you rue the day you were born." Bod sighed, and he lowered the book and leaned out enough to see Thackeray Porringer come stamping up the slippery path. Thackeray was a big boy. He had been 14 when he died, following his initiation as an apprentice to a master house painter. He had been given 8 copper pennies and told not to come back without a half a gallon of red and white striped paint for painting barbers' poles. Thackeray had spent 5 hours being sent all over town one slushy January morning, being laughed at in each establishment he visited, and he sent on to the next. When he realized he had been made a fool of, he had taken an angry case of apoplexy, which carried him off within the week. And he died glaring furiously at the other apprentices and even at Mr. Horrobin, his master painter, who had undergone so much worse back when he was an apprentice that he could scarcely see what all the fuss was about. So Thackeray Porringer had died in a fury, clutching his copy of Robinson Crusoe, which was, apart from a silver 6pence, with the edges clipped in the clothes he had formerly been standing up in, all that he owned, and, at his mother's request, he was buried with his book. Death had not improved Thackeray Porringer's temper, and now he was shouting, "I know you're here somewhere. Come out and take your punishment, you thief." Bod had closed the book. "I'm not a thief, Thackeray. I'm only borrowing it. I promise I'll give the book back when I've finished it." Thackeray looked up, saw Bod nestled behind the statue of Osiris. "I told you not to." Bod sighed. "But there are so few books here. It's just up to a good bit anyway. He's found a footprint. It's not his. That means someone else is on the island." "It's my book," said Thackeray Porringer obstinately. "Give it back." Bod was ready to argue or simply to negotiate, but he saw the hurt on Thackeray's face, and he relented. Bod clambered down the side of the arch, jumped the last few feet. He held out the book. "Here." Thackeray took it gracefully and glared. "I could read it to you," offered Bod. "I could do that." "You could go boil your own fat head," said Thackeray, and he swung a punch at Bod's ear. It connected and it stung, although judging from the look on Thackeray Porringer's face, Bod realized it must have hurt his fist as much as it hurt Bod. The bigger boy stomped off down the path, and Bod watched him go, ear hurting, eyes stinging. Then he watched through the rain back down the treacherous ivy-covered path. At one point he slipped and scraped his knee, tearing his jeans. There was a willow grove beside the wall, and Bod almost ran into Miss Euphemia Horsefall and Tom Sands, who had been stepping out together for many years. Tom had been married so long ago that his stone was just a weathered rock, and he had lived and died during the 100 Years' War with France, while Miss Euphemia, 1861 to 1883, "She sleeps, aye, yet she sleeps with angels," was written on her gravestone, had been buried in Victorian times after the graveyard had been expanded with extended and became, for some 50 years, a successful commercial enterprise, and she had a whole tomb to herself behind a black door in the willow walk. But the couple seemed to have no troubles with the difference in their historical periods. "You should slow down, young Bod," said Tom. "You'll do yourself an injury." "You already did," said Miss Euphemia. "Oh, dear Bod, I have no doubt that your mother will have words with you about that. It's not as if we can easily repair those pantaloons." "Oh, sorry," said Bod. "And your guardian was looking for you," added Tom. Bod looked up at the gray sky. "But it's still daylight," he said. He's up betimes," said Tom, a word which Bod knew meant early, "and said to tell you he wanted you, if we saw you." Bod nodded. "There's ripe hazelnuts in the thicket just beyond the Little John's monument," said Tom with a smile, as if softening a blow. "Thank you," said Bod. He ran on, pell-mell, through the rain and down the winding path into the lower slopes of the graveyard, running until he reached the old chapel. The chapel door was open, and Silas, who had love for neither the rain nor the remnants of the daylight, was standing inside in the shadows. "I heard you were looking for me," said Bod. "Yes," said Silas. Then, "It appears you've torn your trousers." "I was running," said Bod. I got into a bit of a fight with Thackeray Porringer. I wanted to read Robinson Crusoe. It's a book about a man on a boat. That's a thing that goes in the sea, which is water like an enormous puddle, and how the ship is wrecked on an island, which is a place on the sea where you can stand, and," Silas said, "it has been 11 years, Bod. 11 years that you have been with us." "Right," said Bod, "if you say so." Silas looked down at his charge. The boy was lean, and his mouse-colored hair had darkened slightly with age. Inside the old chapel, it was all shadows. "I think," said Silas, "it is time to talk about where you came from." Bod breathed in deeply. He said, "It doesn't have to be now, not if you don't want to." He said it as easily as he could, but his heart was thudding in his chest. Silence. Only the patter of the rain and the wash of the water from the drain pipes. A silence that stretched until Bod thought he would break. Silas said, "You know you're different, that you are alive, that we took you in, they took you in here, and that I agreed to be your guardian." Bod said nothing. Silas continued in his voice like velvet. "You had parents, an older sister. They killed her, or they were killed. I believe that you were to have been killed as well, and that you were not was due to chance and the intervention of the Owenses." "And you," said Bod, who had had the night described to him over the years by many people, some of whom had even been there. It had been a big night in the graveyard. Silas said, "Out there, the man who killed your family is, I believe, still looking for you, still intends to kill you." Bod shrugged. "So?" he said. "It's only death. I mean, all my best friends are dead." "Yes," Silas hesitated, "they are. And they are, for the most part, done with the world. You are not. You're alive, Bod. That means you have infinite potential. You can do anything, make anything, dream anything. If you change the world would change. Potential. Once you're dead, it's gone. Over. You've made what you've made, dreamed your dream, written your name. You may be buried here, you may even walk, but that potential is finished." Bod thought about this. It seemed almost true, although he could think of exceptions. His parents adopting him, for example. But the dead and the living were different. He knew that, even if his sympathies were with the dead. "What about you?" he asked Silas. "What about me?" "Well, you aren't alive, and you go around and do things." "I," said Silas, "am precisely what I am, and nothing more. I am, as you say, not alive, but if I am ended, I shall simply cease to be. My kind are, or we are not, if you see what I mean." "Not really." Silas sighed. The rain was done, and the cloudy gloom had become true twilight. "Bod," he said, "there are many reasons why it is important that we keep you safe." Bod said, "The person who hurt my family, the one who wants to kill me, you're certain that he's out there?" It was something he had been thinking about for a while now, and he knew that what he wanted. "Yes, he's still out there." "Then," said Bod, and said the unsayable, "I want to go to school." Silas was imperturbable. The word could have ended, and he would not have to turn a hair, but now his mouth opened and his brow furrowed, and he said only, "What?" "I've learned a lot in the graveyard," said Bod. "I can fade and I can haunt. I can open a ghoul gate and I know the constellations. But there's a world out there with the sea in it and islands and shipwrecks and pigs. I mean, it's filled with things I don't know, and the teachers here have taught me lots of things, but I need more. If I'm going to survive out there one day." Silas seemed unimpressed. "Out of the question. Here we can keep you safe." "How could we keep you safe out there? Outside, anything could happen." "Yes," agreed Bod. "That's the potential thing you were talking about." He fell silent. Then, "Someone killed my mother and my father and my sister." "Yes, someone did." "A man?" "A man." "Which means," said Bod, "you're asking the wrong question." Silas raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Twigs scratched against the high windows as if they needed to be let in. Silas flicked an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve with a fingernail as sharp as a blade. He said, "We will need to find you a school." No one noticed the boy, not at first. No one even noticed that they had noticed him, that they hadn't noticed him. He sat halfway back in class. He didn't answer much, not unless he was directly asked a question. And even then his answers were short and forgettable, colorless. He faded in mind and in memory. "Do you think they're religious, his family?" asked Mr. Kirby in the teacher's staff room. He was marking essays. "Whose family?" asked Mrs. McKinnon. "Owen's in 8B, said Mr. Kirby. "The tall, spotty lad?" "I don't think so, sort of medium height." Mrs. McKinnon shrugged. "What about him?" "Handwrites everything," said Mr. Kirby. "Lovely handwriting, what they used to call copperplate. And that makes him religious because he says they don't have a computer. And he doesn't have a phone." "I don't see why that makes him religious," said Mrs. McKinnon, who had taken up crocheting when they had banned smoking in the staff room, and was sitting and crocheting a baby blanket for no one in particular. Mr. Kirby shrugged. "He's a smart lad," he said. "There's just stuff he doesn't know, and in history he'll throw in little made-up details, stuff not in the books." "What kind of stuff?" Mr. Kirby finished marking Bod's essays, and put it down on the pile. Without something immediately in front of him, the whole matter seemed vague and unimportant. "Stuff," he said, and forgot about it. Just as he forgot to enter Bod's name on the roll, just as Bod's name was not to be found on the school databases. The boy was a model pupil, forgettable and easily forgotten, and he spent much of his spare time in the back of the English class where there were shelves of old paperbacks, and in the school library, a large room filled with books and old armchairs where he read stories as enthusiastically as some children ate. Even the other kids forgot about him, not when he was sitting in front of them, they remembered him then, but when that Owens kid was out of sight, he was out of mind. They didn't think about him, they didn't need to. If someone asked all the kids in 8B to close their eyes and list the 25 boys and girls in the class, that Owens kid wouldn't have been on the list. His presence was almost ghostly. It was different if he was there, of course. Nick Farthing was 12, but he could pass, and did sometimes, for 16, a large boy with a crooked smile and little imagination. He was practical in a basic sort of way, an efficient shoplifter, an occasional thug who did not care about being liked as long as the other kids, all smaller, did what he said. Anyway, he had a friend. Her name was Maureen Quilling, but everyone called her Mo, and she was thin and had pale skin and pale yellow hair, watery blue eyes, and a sharp, inquisitive nose. Nick liked to shoplift, but Mo told him what to steal. Nick could hit and hurt and intimidate, but Mo pointed him at the people who needed to be intimidated. They were, as she told him sometimes, a perfect team. They were sitting in the corner of the library, splitting their take of the year 7's pocket money. They had 8 or 9 of the 11-year-olds trained to hand over their pocket money every week. "The sign kid hasn't coughed up yet," said Mo. "You'll have to find him." "Yeah," said Nick. "He'll pay." "What was it he nicked? A CD?" Nick nodded. "Just point out the error of his ways," said Mo, who wanted to sound like the hard cases from the television. "Easy," said Nick. "We're a good team." "Like Batman and Robin," said Mo. "More like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde," said somebody who had been reading unnoticed in a window seat, and he got up and walked out of the room. Paul Sine was sitting on a windowsill by the changing rooms, his hands deep in his pockets, thinking dark thoughts. He took one hand out of his pocket, opened it, and looked at the handful of pound coins, shook his head, closed his hand around the coins once more. "Is that what Nick and Mo were waiting for?" somebody asked, and Paul jumped, scattering money all over the floor. The other boy helped him pick the coins up, handed them over. He was an older boy, and Paul thought he'd seen him around before, but he could not be certain. Paul said, "Are you with them, Nick and Mo?" The other boy shook his head. "Nope, I think they are fairly repulsive," he stated. Then he said, "Actually, I came to give you a bit of advice." "Yeah? Don't pay them." "Easy for you to say. Because they aren't blackmailing me?" The boy looked at Paul, and Paul looked away, ashamed. "They hit you or threatened you until you shoplifted a CD for them. Then they told you that unless you handed over your pocket money to them, they'd tell on you. What did they do, film you doing it?" Paul nodded. "Just say no," said the boy. "Don't do it." "They'll kill me," and they said, "Tell them that you think the police and school authorities could be a lot more interested in a couple of kids who are getting younger kids to steal for them and then forcing them to hand over their pocket money than they ever would be in one kid forced to steal a CD against his will. That if they touch you again, they'll make the call to the police, and that you've written it all up, and if anything happens to you, anything at all, if you get a black eye or anything, your friends will automatically send it to the school authorities and the police." Paul said, "But I can't." "Then you'll pay them your pocket money for the rest of your time in this school, and you'll stay scared of them." Paul thought, "Why don't I just tell the police anyway?" he asked. "Can if you like." "I'll try it your way first," said Paul. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was a smile right enough, his first in 3 weeks. So Paul Sign explained to Nick Farthing just how and why he wouldn't be paying him any longer, and walked away while Nick Farthing just stood and didn't say anything, clenching and unclenching his fists. And the next day, another 5 11-year-olds found Nick Farthing in the playground and told him they wanted their money back, all the pocket money they'd handed over in the previous month, or they'd be going to the police. And now Nick Farthing was an extremely unhappy young man. Mo said, "It was him. He started it. If it wasn't for him, they'd never have thought of it on their own. He's the one we have to teach a lesson. Then they'll all behave." "Who?" said Nick. "The one who's always reading, the one from the library. Bob Owens, him." Nick nodded slowly. Then he said, "Which one is he?" "I'll point him out to you," said Mo. So that's the first half of chapter 6, and we'll continue there next Friday for the rest of chapter 6. So stay tuned.